afternoon, everyone. My name's Sue Blight. My background is in retail and manufacturing in head of learning and development roles, latterly of Dairy Crest, so welcome any Dairy Crest people coming along. I guess my interest in this whole topic came from my master's in coaching and behaviour change, and I really focused on reflection as a key differentiator, I think, for people's effectiveness, and I certainly use it in all the coaching that I now do in my role as an exec coach. So the takeaways today, we've gone through the objectives, but the takeaways, you will have an experience of reflection during this half hour, and also I'll provide you with a framework to enable you to reflect and begin that process, and also some ideas on how you can focus your reflection. And I'll be sharing with you the study that I ran late last year. So if we're all ready to go, I just wanted to give you some context. And I think we can all agree that change is everywhere, and we notice it ourselves. And I think the change reflects our changing consumer needs. People are wanting things faster, they want goods at their fingertips and the speed of response. So we have things like Uber, so we can see when your driver's arriving. We've got purple bricks when we're buying houses, that's cutting out the middleman of estate agents. Deliveroo, a speedier way to get your takeaways, and Amazon Prime, which is really focusing on delivering, at speed, so you get goods the next day. But we've also got in the centre of it Brexit, which is core to everything that we're thinking about at the minute, and that provides us with a great deal of uncertainty about where businesses are going in the future and what the future's looking like. But we know that if we're not responsive, it can, and if businesses don't flex, then and adapt, then they won't survive. So here's just a few examples of companies that have gone to the wall because of the change in consumer needs. So no longer do we have HMV. The streaming and Spotify and those sorts of avenues now are much more, have taken over. You've also got things like House of Fraser, Debenhams, and Ed's Diner is the latest, that are reducing the footfall in the high street. So our high streets are going to look very, very different in the future. And I've put a picture of the library in there. There's think tanks going on at the minute on how libraries can change and adapt because they're closing due to the fact that we're now researching more using Google and other search engines to find our information, so we don't have to go and visit libraries. But what do we put in the place? So that all is making huge amounts of change and uncertainty, and changing the face of how we use information. So the impact on business is pretty significant, and you've probably all felt some of this. But customers are much more are asking a lot more questions of their suppliers about ethical trading. So social responsibility probably was something that we thought was a bit of a tick box a few years ago, but it's now actually becoming very important to customers to make sure that we've got the right gender mix, that we've got the right ethnic mix, that we're all doing things in a quality way and a sustainable way. We've also got things like big data, which is dictating our consumer trends, and we'll all know from our point of sale that is something that all those trends are being picked up and determine our buying strategies. Also, there's the rise of agile scrums. So agile teams coming together, and this can be seen as far as insurance companies that are now building these sorts of teams that come together for a very short period of time. They deliver on what they're being asked to deliver on, and then they exit, go back to what they were doing. So we know there are disruptors that are trying to just upturn some of the industry. And also probably the most significant is single source plastic, so single-use plastic, I should say. And the whole rise of Blue Planet has really focused businesses' minds, and whoever sorts that is going to make a huge amount of money in the future, because it's now in the consciousness of the whole population. And a global population. Okay, so what this means is that there are new behaviours that are being required of all of us. So things like being more agile, maybe going outside of our job descriptions to do other things that are bolted on. There's also a need for collaboration. So more and more collaboration as we're more matrixed and maybe have 2 or 3 bosses. So working together more to find solutions, and also being held accountable. So rather than going through panel after panel to get things, and meeting after meeting to get your ideas through, it's much more about you're accountable for your actions. And also flexibility. So when change happens, we're all expected to be very flexible and move with that change. So it's almost become a norm. And also managing stakeholders. So our stakeholders getting wider as businesses are more complex. So we're having to deal with more and more people in order to get our objectives delivered. So I just wanted to pause there and just do a short poll really on which of these 5 are becoming important in your own business. So you can click on as many as you want. The poll's open now. And I just want you to click on where you notice that these behaviours are becoming more prominent in your business. So flexibility and agility seem to be quite prominent, as well as collaboration. So that's interesting, because in the research I've done, those did come out as the top 3 when people are researching businesses. So that's very interesting that you're seeing that as well. Okay. So sometimes what that means is that with the fast pace of change and everything that's going on, we start to get some mixed messages, and you may have found some of these as well. So sometimes people are told to see the big picture, but in the next breath know all the details. So be strategic, but know the nth degree of the information that you're providing. And also you can do, this is one that we've all come across, is you have to do more, but you've not got the same amount of resource. So what that is requiring of us is that we need to be more creative, work smarter, and it's quite often quite difficult to navigate through that. So I'm curious as to whether you're experiencing any other mixed messages that you experience in your own organisation. Interesting, in things like 360, you find that one person's assertion is another person's aggression. So do I need to be assertive? What's the difference? So we start to see some of those trends coming through. But the second question around that is how would you currently make sense of these mixed messages? And I think the key here is the need to keep your radar out, to know what's going on in the business, to talk to other people, to help you understand what is the changing business context. So it's the onus is on us to be able to do that. Okay, so one of the ways that you can start to manage all these different messages is around building your own resilience. So we all need to build our individual resilience to be able to cope with the pressures and stresses and strains within the work that we do. And there are 6 areas where resilience can show itself. And this is part of a program that I run, looking at each of these factors. So the first one is around personal resilience. So how do you deal with pressure? And understanding those triggers, you can start to notice how you can respond in the moment and create a different response to that. We've got reflection, which is a key piece of resilience, by regularly reflecting, which is what we'll look at shortly. Then there's resilient thinking. So quite a lot of the things that stop us are us ourselves. So the things that we put in place, the business wouldn't allow me to do that. I wouldn't be able to do that. So things that stop us, that get in the way, and rethinking that to say, well, what if I could do it? What if it was possible to change the mind of my manager or the business? Building muscle, quite often we focus on our development needs, but actually if we play to our strengths, that can help build confidence and help us to use those strengths when you're dealing with other issues that are less comfortable for you. And then resilience through change. How do you respond to change? How do you approach change when it's announced? But also understanding your response, you can help others with their response. And then resilience in today's world, that's more about understanding your stakeholders, keeping that radar open to understand the differing changes in the business, and being able to respond and understand why that's happening. So all of those can help build your resilience. So the one we're going to look at today is reflection. So that's what we're going to focus on now. So reflection is quite a simple concept. And if we were to define it, I would suggest it's a way of making sense and learning from your experiences. And taking some time out or pressing that pause button helps you to breathe and think about things that in a very busy day-to-day rush that we don't find time to do that. Interestingly, there's the chief exec of LinkedIn, Jeff Viner, says he takes time out to reflect, and he sees it as the single most important productivity tool in his armour. It helps him understand when he's getting too involved, if he's not using his team in the best way, is he focusing on the right things at that right time? So we're going to now have a go at reflecting so you can experience this. If you have a think about a time, think of a time at work when you were proud of something you did. So it could be you delivered a presentation that was quite scary, or you got your idea through, and then think about what did you do to make it brilliant. So what were the things you did that made it brilliant? And then the final part is, how would you apply that experience to other situations? An example for me was I completed a master's and I got a distinction which I've never ever achieved before. And it was, now I know that I can learn and reflect and do all these use these fantastic skills when I'm coaching other people. So I know if I can do it, then I know other people can do it. So you might come up with some specific examples where you've done something at work. So as you're thinking about that, just in terms of that structure, the first two are about recalling a situation. So you're thinking about what you did and what was the situation. But the third question is where the reflection comes in. So how can you apply that experience to other situations? So what you're doing is you're consciously unpacking that situation and thinking about those skills and applying it to other situations. And that's where your conscious learning comes in. So I'm going to move on to just define a bit more about what reflection is. So it is a conscious process because, like you've just done, you're thinking of something that you did. So you're paying attention to your learning. It's also deliberate learning because you're focused. It's also a balanced process, which I'll come onto in my research, but you looked at something that you did really well, and quite often we look at just the things that didn't go well. So reflection is about balancing your positives in the day or in your week, as well as your negatives, things that you can learn from and do differently. What I mean by a synaptic process is that the brain does encourage you to learn, and we know from research into neuroscience that we can create different neural pathways all the time. We're doing it all the time. So by deliberately learning, we are creating that neural pathway. So when you have a similar situation again, you can then use that experience. It's something in the brain will alert you to the fact that you have done this before and you have learned from it. It's an objective assessment because you're standing back and really thinking about, what is it I did? What made this good? Or what if it didn't work? What was it I did that didn't make it work? So the emotion comes out of it a bit more. And also it's a way of reframing events. So by standing back and thinking that didn't go particularly well, what else could have been going on? And sometimes you might come to the conclusion that it's nothing to do with you. It might have been something, in the situation that was outside your control. But there's always things that you can do. What reflection isn't is about brooding and mulling things over. People tend to, when things have gone wrong, either sweep it under the carpet, or they think about it over and over again and just get more negative about the situation. And by not downloading, it means that becomes almost like a trigger when the next time something happens. And what it can be is that we start to become a bit more indecisive. So by not downloading and processing it, when that situation comes up again, you're probably a bit more nervous or anxious. So that won't be helpful to your effectiveness. So why do reflection? Why build reflection into your day? Well, there is some research that was done about some surgeons, and they were responsible for amputations, funnily enough. And what they did was they split this group of surgeons in two. One group just practiced and re-practiced their skills, so they just tried to get better at what they did. But the other group were asked to reflect on the surgeons, the surgical processes that they'd just done. And what they started to notice was they were thinking about how they communicated with the surgical team. How did they use the strengths in the team? Did they use all the team in the best way? And, you know, could they have done something different? And what the research showed was, in that particular case, productivity and the quality of the group that had reflected increased by 12%. So we know it can be a very strong productivity tool. So that's where my interest came in, and I was very happy that Dairycrest invited me back in to run a little research project on reflection and how we could optimize reflection into managers' effectiveness. So 12 managers were asked to reflect for 15 minutes at the end of their working shift. And they reflected each day for 3 working weeks. So in order to help them, I provided a 2-hour training session to help them understand what reflection was. And I also provided them with a structure, which I'm going to share with you in a minute. And then they were given the option to either set their own learning goals, or maybe just see what came out of their reflections, what emerged, what themes started to emerge as they reflected. So quite a lot of support in the early days, and also I briefed their line managers as well, so they understood exactly what their teams or their managers were going to do. At the end of that 3 weeks, I went back and interviewed each of the managers that had been reflecting, and there were some very interesting results that came out. So it seemed to fall into 3 categories. One was around shifting their behaviour or flexing their behaviour. One was around their attitude. And thirdly was around their thinking process. So just to point out a few of those, I have to say it didn't suit everyone, but even those that maybe found it more difficult to build into their work, there were still some really good results. So some of them were around dealing with time stealers. So where did their time go in the day? They wanted to focus on improving their productivity in the day, and they began to notice who are the people that took a lot of their time, and they started to put strategies in place by going to see them early morning to discuss what had happened the day before or the night before, and therefore that reduced the amount of times that those individuals then came to see that person in the day. Also, they were able to handle conflict better because they were reflecting on situations that were tricky. What did they do? How could they have done it differently? What did they do well? So when those tension discussions or situations came up, they were more better able to deal with that. There was also something about building confidence. So there was one person who said, you know, if you'd asked me how many times I coached in a day, I would have said once, but actually I noticed today that I did that 5 times. So actually you start to focus on the things that you are doing well. And then reducing panic in stress situations. So there was someone that, you know, noticed their triggers under stress and started to work on changing their response to that. And they felt a lot calmer as a result. Also slowing down thinking by taking that time out. It provides more choices. So it opens possibility thinking. So, well, what if I was to do this or that, and different options they felt were emerging, and also more balanced thinking. So rather than in the heat of the moment making that decision, they could go away and think, well, what are the pros and cons of this? So it did give us some really good data on how reflection, just in a relatively short period of time, could make a huge difference. So the structure I provided was, and I use this myself, so I'll be doing this after this webinar as well. So think of a positive situation, something that's gone well. Run the situation through your mind, and similar to the exercise you just did, what did you do to contribute to that positive outcome? What have you learned about yourself? And also, how can you apply it to other work situations? So it might be, you know, I really listen well to that person, and actually in conflict situations, when I have more difficult discussions, I might use more listening skills. I might use that a bit more. And then challenging situations, something that didn't go well. If you could turn back time, what would you have done differently? What have you learned about yourself, but also how can you apply that to different situations? So it's a fairly simple structure. And then the final piece, which is where you put it into your day-to-day learning, is based on those two reflections. What will you change tomorrow? So it might be, I'll notice that trigger, or I'll be calmer. One of the things that did come out of the study was thinking of those situations seemed to be quite more difficult in the first 2 days. But then, interestingly, people started to notice situations, and they would put them on post-its to remind themselves at the end of the day some of those situations that have cropped up that they could use for their reflection. So what can get in the way? So it's, you know, it seems like a very positive picture, but there are some things that could get in the way. So people, some people might not like the process, because if you're working at a fast pace and you're being asked to slow down or take time out, that is very different. Don't understand the process, so they haven't been given a structure to follow. And although I've given you a structure, you can make up your own which works for you. But if you don't have that structure, then all you'll do is just be thinking and mulling it over. Also, sometimes they don't like the results. So by reflecting, you might start to think about things that you're not happy, and some of the responses you're not happy with, which is really starting to focus on yourself, and you know, maybe some things that you want to change in yourself because they're not helpful. And also having a bias for action. So there was a sense that for some people there was a guilt at taking some time out, that 15 minutes time out, whilst everyone's working around them. So and also sometimes your reflection may not have an action. It might be something that you're going to note and do differently next time. So it might not be as action focused if that's your preference. And can't see a good return on investment. So there's always the, is 15 minutes a good use of my time? But I think when you start to see some of those results, you know, that is where the genuine benefits start to show themselves. So how can you overcome the barriers? Well, there's a number of things you can do. Focus on what you want to change or rectify. You know, it's quite, by focusing on some specifics, it helps you notice those situations in the day where that crops up. So a good example is the time stealers. You know, I want to know how I use my time. Can I be more productive? So that was a really good focus for that individual, and that's what they spent the 3 weeks reflecting on. Also, select a process that works with your preference. So it might be that if you're more introverted, you might find this more easy to do because you tend to be much more reflective anyway. So it might be that you might spend more time on this. Whereas if you're action focused, then find questions that might be more helpful to that preference. Yeah, if you're action focused, then maybe your questions can reflect that. Also, schedule time. There's something about you can create new habits, and this goes back to the neural pathways. You can change your working routine by scheduling time in. And it's important to find the best time of day for you. So I ask people to do it at the end of shift, but that often coincided with the fact that people had to get some data together from the production figures. So that might not work. But some people said actually evenings were better when I was away from work. Or it might be I'll do it at 4 o'clock before I have to get those figures in. So it's finding a time that suits you. And start small. So don't try and change big chunks of yourself at a time. So it might be I want to be more assertive, and think about maybe meetings. How can I be more assertive in meetings? How can I start to prepare a bit more? What can I do that's different, and get my viewpoint over? So you might want to start on little chunks before getting into the big stuff. And also ask for help. So, you know, there's the whole thing around leadership about showing vulnerability. If you're struggling with it, it might mean that you just want some help. So ask your manager, or maybe buddy up with someone, which a few people did at the Nuneaton site. They actually did their reflection together, because they were both extroverted. That seemed to work for them. Or if you're not thinking, be able to think about scenarios, maybe that's where you could, where it could work. And also set goals. So that could be another one if you're more action focused, to set yourself goals. And also what I found from the research was actually write it down. So you might want to get a little book or a journal or something like that. And something that resonated with me from the research was someone said, when you write it down, it's like engraving it on your memory, and I'll remember and notice that going forward. Whereas I think if you put it into an app or something like that, it isn't the same as writing it. I think there's something more that happens, which fires up something else in the brain. Okay, so one of those things was around setting goals. So these were the options that you can approach reflection. So you can set yourself goals. Think about what's in your development plan, what feedback you've had, what's come out of appraisals, and maybe courses. You can use it as reflecting on maybe a course that you've attended. And there's some questions there that you might want to think about. You know, how can I better influence my peers, dealing with conflict, difficult discussions, that sort of thing. Or you can just have a go, which was the advice of one of the participants of my study. So just notice what's coming out. What am I noticing? What impact's that having? What have I not been seeing? You know, when you start to look at things, you might notice a few more things coming up. Yeah, and who does this skill or behaviour well? So it might be, if you want to develop your presentation skills, look at someone that does it well. What do they do? Go and ask them, and reflect on how they share that with you. So all of those are really good ways of either way. There wasn't a conclusive you should do this or you should do this. I think both of those approaches work well. Okay, so we're coming to the end of this webinar in terms of input. So the summary is developing reflection can help build your resilience, because you are taking time out and you are slowing down your thinking and breathing, which when you're in high pressure situations is quite difficult to do. It can also help keep a perspective and balance. So quite often, if we're just thinking negative thoughts, we forget all the good things that we do, and actually there might be other things going on in the context of the situation that might also be impacting. But it can also build confidence by looking at positive situations. It can help to build confidence and realize what you are actually doing well. We tend to always look at what we don't do well. So actually just consciously thinking about that is really important. It has been highlighted as a key productivity tool, and certainly the results that came out of my research showed that there was improvement in overall effectiveness. Find a strategy that works for you. Buddy up, time of day. You might not want to reflect every day. There was some people that said actually it was a bit too much every day, but maybe you want to do it twice or 3 times a week. Monday and Friday would be great. Balance those positive and negative situations to create the balance. And also creating the habit of reflection takes time, so don't give up. Keep going with it, because eventually it will become a habit, and it will get to a point where you might miss a day, but you really feel like you have missed a day. So that could be it might take a couple of attempts just to keep going with it.